The Day Before offers a uniquely reimagined journey into post-apocalyptic MMO open-world survival.
You sit on a throne of lies.
Woodbury survivors are working to rebuild the community, constantly needing supplies, building materials, and various items.
That's rubbish!
And remember, dangers are everywhere here.
Right, yeah, of course.
Over the past several years, I've played plenty of bad and even horrible games, but there have been very few that I'd classify openly as being entirely unredeemable. But that was before I ran headlong into The Day Before. Now, if you haven't been closely following the public debacle surrounding this game and its abysmal, almost non-existent development status, there are plenty of articles and videos you can find out there on the internet that'll fill you in on just a few of the nonsensical milestones that have cropped up over the past 2 or 3 years. This game was loudly proclaimed almost exclusively by both the developers and IGN, who as usual just accepted anything and everything a developer told them without the slightest question or pushback, as being the one indie game of 2023 to totally redefine modern gaming for the entire industry. And given the end result, I guess you could say they got their wish, but not exactly in the way they might have hoped. The Day Before is basically the monkey's paw cliche made real in digital form. The developers got their wish in the worst possible way. Fast forward a mere 13 days after the game's release. The game has received a critical score of 15% on Steam, equal to an overwhelmingly negative collective rating. Out of over 22,000 contributed user reviews as of the recording of this video, making it one of the worst rated games to have released this year. The developers have delisted it from Steam, making it inaccessible to purchase, with Steam going so far as to give unconditional refunds to pretty much anyone seeking it, and the developers behind it, Fantastic, having publicly declared bankruptcy and dissolving their studio, thereby disappearing into the ether. I bought this game on day one, but having been a bit preoccupied with finals at the time, which happened to coincide with that given week, I didn't actually get a chance to play it until a few days ago, and by God, I had no idea what to expect other than it would probably be a wild ride, and in that regard the game did not entirely disappoint. The first thing you'll notice right off the bat is that the game runs like total dog shit. I'm running this off my Intel i7 NVIDIA 4070 RTX laptop at 1440p, using the latest software drivers, so there is no excuse for even the slightest performance hitch on my part. The minimum supported GPU is a NVIDIA 1060 with the recommended being a 1080, so I'm like 3 whole generations ahead of the game, and even then, the game works about as well as Cyberpunk 2077 if played in an Intel integrated graphics card. That is to say, it barely runs at all. Oh, and did I mention, it's running off my laptop's internal SSD, thus it should have even more reason to perform ideally. This game has more than everything it needs to meet marginally acceptable competence levels, and yet it still flops like a fish out of water. I even tried lowering the various graphical settings from ultra to a mix of medium and low, and even then the performance was mediocre at best. But believe me, that is just the beginning. Just wait. It gets so much worse. Hit registration is almost non-existent. You can nail perfect headshots and it'll still require like 3 or 4 consecutive shots before you can kill even one isolated zombie. Luckily 9 times out of 10, 1 or maybe 2 isolated zombies is likely all you're going to run into at any given time. This game is so unbelievably dead, I have like no words for it. Like I said a minute ago, the performance was abysmal. This game literally gave me blurry vision, nausea, a headache, and even a strong sensation of tiredness, aka 3 of the key signs of motion sickness. And believe me when I say I never get motion sickness when playing any game. I've played VR games at conventions and even that shit doesn't bother me in the slightest. The last time I remember experiencing motion sickness, it was that awful Spy Kids 3D movie back in like 2002 or 3. It's been a whole 20 plus years since I felt this awful. So understand that when I say this game is sickening visual garbage, at least performance-wise, that's not hyperbole. I'm being as literal as it possibly gets. It literally made me sick. Graphically, the in-game world is quite vividly designed. I love the large-scale map design of the city here, at least in theory. That said, there is something inexplicably off about the assets used here. All current evidence present indicates that almost all of the city assets you see on screen were all from Unreal Engine Marketplace asset packs. Personally, I don't care all that much if an indie game uses store-bought third-party assets. My main concern is whether the assets, original or pre-made, contribute towards establishing a clear and consistent artistic vision, one that preferably gets me further invested in the game at large. And on its own, this part of the game mostly works. The world is visually striking to look at. The problem is that there isn't anything remotely for the player to do other than to walk around and look. The Day Before is basically a spectator sport. And given that the game often stutters and comes to a halt for no reason whatsoever, it can't even handle being a spectator sport, let alone a real, actual, functioning game. What really seals the deal for me in condemning this game as an unredemptive abomination is the gameplay itself. This game fails at being an MMO, which is what it was originally marketed as being. It fails as being an extraction shooter, since the entire world is pretty much empty save for the occasional zombie and the even rarer human player. It fails as a loot acquisition game, since there's almost nothing to loot aside from a few nondescript food items and some weapons. And it fails at being an open world game, since easily 90% of the buildings you'll see are completely inaccessible. I'd much rather the world be a quarter of the current size if it meant the majority of buildings were fully or even partially explorable and had decent loot and enemy encounters for the player, aka me, to enjoy. It's not hard. The quests are about as basic and uninteresting as it possibly gets. Mindless fetch quests from beginning to end. Go get 5 medical supplies. Go get 5 food supplies. Go get 5 bottles of water, etc. And on top of that, find enough room in your backpack to carry sellable items to build up enough currency to buy ammo and new guns, because God knows you're never going to have enough bullets. Especially since the starting amount is barely enough to get you past half a dozen or so individual zombies, let alone anything more than that. The voice acting and animations are so janky and awkward, and just collectively scream of this game being rushed and on a tight budget. I refuse to believe that the game that supposedly has been in development for over 5 years now, or whatever the hell the developers absurdly claim, would have lip-syncing and bodily animations this rough. Not to mention the half-assed quality of the voice acting. While none of the voice acting is awful per se individually, nothing notable enough to be interesting in a bad kind of way, there was a clear, definitive lack of vocal direction here. In most cases, it sounds like they're just reading their lines aloud rather than acting them out. I don't pretend to have like the most animated voice when I talk about games on my channel. I know that I can sound a little bit monotonous. I do have that tendency in my voice. Something I try to, work on as I'm making these YouTube videos, but let me just tell you, I'm pretty sure I could have done a better job voice acting some of these roles than the voice actors who actually did it. And I have no illusions about how attractive my voice sounds. Also, I know this is getting into nitpick territory, but from the moment the game begins with an opening cutscene, followed by a series of basic introductory A to B, then B to A style conversation quests where you're sent back and forth to talk to various NPCs in the base that serves as the main hub, the overall theme is that this base is supposedly the last refuge of humanity in the wake of this zombie apocalypse. Even in some of the pre-release trailers, they hype this place up, but when you actually walk around it, the entire base is almost absolutely empty, save for like 6 or 7 lone NPC vendors that sell you shit. There's no actual people, no civilians wandering around the world to give the place any active sense of being lived in and populated by actual, breathing NPC people. And I have no idea why they skimped on this, because it wouldn't have even been that difficult to add. When you play Insomniac's Spider-Man game, the one that came out on the PS4 and later got booted to PC, one of the central hub locations you frequently visit throughout the story campaign is this homeless shelter. It's a multi-leveled, medium-sized space filled with rooms of various sizes and purposes. When you go into the main auditorium where most of the homeless people eat and sleep, you can see dozens of NPCs walking around or sitting down or talking to each other, doing other normal stuff. If you wander around the office areas upstairs, you'll find people working in office spaces or talking on the phones in corridors. It feels very natural. This is only one single space in a far bigger open-world game. You're telling me with over 5 years of supposed development, half a decade of this game being worked on, that the game that supposedly was going to challenge bigger AAA games as being the next big thing for gaming, the day before couldn't even create one single populated hub zone filled with 20 or 30 NPCs walking the halls and providing the smallest shred of human life? It's symbolic of the game's biggest problem. It's a lifeless husk. Other people can dissect whether this game technically and legally constitutes a deliberate scam on behalf of the developers. That's not my interest area here. But one fact I'm pretty sure is not in dispute is that this is easily one of the worst games I've played this year, and there is no way in hell I could possibly stoop to recommend this to anyone at all. It fails to deliver a compelling story. It fails to deliver satisfying gameplay. It fails to meet even a minimal performance standard on high-end rigs, let alone the budget PC specs it claims to support. It's almost impossible to fail in all these areas and more, even if you are actively trying to. I'm shocked that not only the developer, but especially their publisher, Mytona, for not stepping in to even marginally bandage this gaping, festering, cancerous growth of a game. Credit to Valve for at least stepping in and forcing Mytona in Fantastic's hand by granting full product refunds to anyone who made the mistake of buying this damned game. It's nice to see that there are at least some people in positions of power who are willing to punish bad actors like this, and hopefully by doing so, disincentivize other incompetent and unethical developers and publishers from behaving in a similar manner. At any rate, that's where I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. If you want to see me cover other games of interest, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think of the day before. It's definitely a hot button topic right now. I know I'm definitely late to the table, but I thought it was still worth voicing my experience with it. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see similar review videos in the future. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome and peace out.